It happened on a Wednesday. Nothing dramatic, no storm, no loud noise, no sudden scare. You just did what you always do. I walked to the window with your coffee, looked out at the feeder, and something felt off. They were gone. Not one bird, not a couple. All of them. The feeder just hangs there, full of seeds, completely untouched. The branch where the chickadee always sat, empty. That corner of the fence where the sparrows would bicker every single morning. Silent. You didn't change the seeds. You didn't move anything. You didn't do anything wrong, as far as you could tell. And somehow, overnight, your yard went from this living, breathing little world to a ghost town. And here's the part that's strange. The birds didn't leave the neighborhood. You can still hear them. Somewhere down the street, in someone else's yard, they're singing, they're feeding, they're fine, they just won't come back to yours. And the reason why has nothing to do with what you're probably thinking. Most people go straight to food. Bad seed, wrong feeder, wrong grain. So they swap everything out, deep clean the feeder, and wait. The birds still haven't come back. Then they figure it was a predator. A cat maybe, or a hawk that showed up once and scared them off. They look around, don't find anything, and tell themselves things will go back to normal eventually. They don't. Here's what almost nobody thinks about. Birds don't read your yard the way you do. You stand at that window and think, looks fine to me. But they're not using your eyes. They're processing acoustic signals, chemical signals, light frequencies, electromagnetic information, an entire layer of the world you genuinely cannot perceive. And somewhere in your yard, one of those signals changed. Something you probably didn't even notice. Maybe something you thought was an improvement, but to them it landed like one clear, unambiguous message. Danger, don't land here. And I know that sounds like a lot, but this matters, especially if you spent real time watching birds. If you know that feeling, that quiet kind of satisfaction when your yard is full of movement and sound and life, then you know exactly how unsettling the silence that replaces it can be. But here's the part that's harder to sit with. Those birds didn't make a choice. They responded to a signal they couldn't override, something that, once it registers in their nervous system, is really difficult to undo. Some of them may never come back, not because anything was done to hurt them, because of something invisible. Something you didn't even know you'd changed. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what that signal was. And honestly, you'll never look at a quiet feeder the same way again. If this kind of thing is new to you, this is what this channel is about. Subscribe before you forget, because what's coming next is genuinely going to shift how you see your own backyard. Okay, close your eyes for a second. Picture the soundscape of your yard on a normal morning. Wind, low and steady, leaves moving, maybe some distant traffic. And underneath all of it, bird song. Constant, layered, kind of overlapping in this way you stop noticing after a while. Now imagine one layer of that just disappears. Not the whole thing, just one thread. One species that used to call from the north corner of your yard and now doesn't. To you, that's a small thing, barely noticeable. To every other bird within 100 yards, it's a red alert. Here's why. Birds don't just sing for territory or to find a mate. They're collectively maintaining what behavioral ecologists call a continuous acoustic map, basically a real-time, community-wide signal that tells every bird in the area this place is safe, occupied, and normal. When one species that normally calls from a spot goes suddenly quiet, that silence carries meaning. It says something happened here. Something shifted. And other birds feel that gap before they even consciously process it. It's like that moment in a crowded room when everyone stops talking at once. Your body registers it before your brain does. The threat response fires first. That's why one missing species can set off a chain reaction. The sparrows noticed the wrens went quiet. The finches noticed the sparrows pulled back. And within days, a yard that used to have this whole layered acoustic community develops what researchers call an acoustic shadow, a dead zone in the soundscape. And to any bird deciding whether to land, it reads exactly like a warning sign written in a language only they understand. Here's something that most people have genuinely never thought about. Birds don't see light the way we do. Not even close. They can perceive ultraviolet frequencies, UV light, that is completely invisible to the human eye. And they're using that constantly. To assess food, to recognize other birds, to read their environment. So when the light in your yard changes, even slightly, they're seeing something you're not. Maybe you put in new blinds, got replacement windows with a different glass coating. Maybe you moved a mirror, added some reflective garden features. Or honestly, maybe the neighbors just painted their house and the way light bounces into your yard shifted during the late morning hours. To you, nothing changed. But to a bird approaching your feeder from the southeast at 8:15 in the morning, suddenly there's a UV reflection coming off a surface that never used to do that. And in bird neurology, an unexpected UV reflection from something that isn't moving has one primary association: a predator's eye, a predator's feathers, water sitting on a predator's back. It doesn't have to make logical sense, it just has to trip the wire. And a threat response in a bird doesn't pause to investigate. It says, leave now, figure it out later. And for a bird that's already associated with a location with that feeling, later sometimes never comes. One reflective surface, one light change you didn't even notice, and to them, your yard started looking like something was watching from it. This is the one that genuinely catches people off guard. Birds communicate fear chemically. When a bird is injured or stressed or killed near a location, it releases chemical compounds. Stress hormones, uropedral secretions, things detectable in feathers and droppings. And other birds can sense them. You can't. Your nose isn't built for it, but theirs are. And here's the thing, once those signals are in an environment, they don't just disappear. They absorb into surfaces, into wood, into soil, into the porous material of a feeder that's been sitting outside through sun and rain. They linger there, quietly saying in chemical language, something suffered here. Maybe a bird hit your window and didn't make it. Maybe a predator made a kill somewhere close to the feeder and left traces behind. Maybe, and this one surprises people, you clean the feeder with a product that, to bird senses, has a chemical signature that overlaps with those stress compounds, just enough to set something off. The bird flying toward your yard doesn't see anything wrong, but it catches the ghost of something that went wrong. And that ghost, completely odorless to you, invisible to you, is loud to them. Loud enough to redirect the approach, to make a full feeder feel like a setup. That's what people mean by the scent of death. It's not dramatic, not visible, just a trace, just enough to say, don't. In every local bird population, there are certain individuals that carry way more social weight than the others. Not leaders exactly, more like information nodes. Scouts, birds whose movements other birds have learned to pay attention to and quietly mirror. A lot of the time, it's a mockingbird, sometimes a crow. Occasionally just a dominant sparrow that's held the same territory long enough that the whole local community has calibrated around it without really knowing why. When that bird stops coming to your yard, the ripple is almost immediate. Other birds aren't sitting there thinking the sentinel left, so I should too. It's not that conscious, but they're constantly cross-referencing their own read of a place against the behavior of birds they've learned to trust. And if the mockingbird that used to circle your yard 3 times every morning suddenly starts routing around it, that gets factored in, quietly, automatically, into every other bird's threat calculation. And here's the part that really gets me. That sentinel bird might have stopped coming for a reason that had nothing to do with you directly. A sound frequency it couldn't tolerate, a UV reflection that bothered its specific visual processing, a territorial signal from a rival near your property line. You'd never know. You might not even notice that it specifically stopped showing up, but its absence broadcasts something across the flock, across species. And one by one, your yard quietly falls off the safe list, and you're standing at the window wondering what you did wrong. There's a well-documented thing in bird behavior called neophobia, fear of new objects, and in birds it runs really, genuinely deep, which when you think about it, makes complete sense. In a wild environment, a new shape in a familiar landscape is almost always worth being suspicious of. Something that wasn't on that branch yesterday or on the ground near the feeder or sitting at the edge of the yard, it could be a predator holding still. Could be a trap, could be something that just hasn't shown what it is yet. So the brain does what it's built to do. Avoid it until it's proven safe. And that proof? It takes time, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, and sometimes weeks. And sometimes it never comes. Maybe you put out a garden decoration, a new chair, a wind chime that catches the light in a certain way, a flag, a child's toy left out overnight. Something completely harmless to you, maybe even something that looks nice. To the birds, it's an unidentified object in a place they had already mapped and trusted. And unidentified people don't get trusted quickly. The bird that was about to land notices it, pulls back, circles once, decides it's not worth the risk, and leaves. Then it doesn't come back until that thing has been sitting there, completely still, completely harmless, long enough for the threat level to quietly downgrade. Sometimes that's 3 days, sometimes 3 months, and sometimes by the time the object finally stops being scary, the habit of visiting has already dissolved. The routine is just gone. Here's what makes all of this feel genuinely strange. If you had a camera pointed at your yard at the exact moment the birds stopped coming, you probably wouldn't see anything happen. No predator, no incident, no moment you could point to, just the feeder. The branch, that familiar corner of the fence. And then slowly the visits would start spacing out, getting further apart, and then nothing. Because whatever caused it might have happened 4 days earlier, 3 yards away, in a sound frequency you can't hear, a UV spectrum you can't see, a chemical trace that had already faded long before you even noticed the silence. It traveled to your yard like a signal moving through water, slow, invisible. And by the time you felt it, the message had already been delivered, received, and acted on. So after all of that, the acoustic shadows, the UV reflections, the sentinel bird, the neophobia, the chemical traces, here is the smallest, most ordinary thing that has emptied entire feeders and kept them empty for weeks. You washed the feeder with a new sponge, one that had dish soap on it, scented. You rinsed it off. It looked perfectly clean. But birds are detecting chemical compounds at concentrations we can barely even measure. That tiny trace of artificial fragrance, floral, citrus, whatever fresh smells like to us, has no equivalent anywhere in the natural world. It doesn't belong there. And it sits on that feeder surface, sending a signal in a language that is older than every bird alive today. This isn't right. This didn't come from nature. Don't eat here. That's it. A clean feeder, a new soap, a scent you couldn't even detect after rinsing. And the birds read it as contamination, because to them, that's exactly what it is. Go back to that Wednesday morning. The full feeder, the empty branch, the silence sitting where all that sound used to be. You know now it wasn't random. Somewhere in the days before, a signal changed. Something shifted in the acoustic map, in the light, in the chemical signature of a surface they'd come to trust. And that trust, precise, fragile, built on frequencies you didn't even know existed, quietly broke. Your yard didn't become dangerous. It became unreadable. And for a creature whose survival depends entirely on reading everything correctly, that's close enough to the same thing.